Hi, everybody. Just a quick reminder to vote if you haven't already. They're saying that if you're filling out a ballot at home, to find a drop-off location. And there are many of those all around town. So drop it off there. In other words, please don't mail in your ballot at this point. Of course, you can always vote at your local polling place if you're able. Okay, on with the show.
My whole life changed because of California, recovery, San Francisco, which was such a different place back then. A city of poets, a city of writers and artists. It was an incredible place. It was just an amazing place.
That was poet and author Alan Kaufman. Welcome to Storied San Francisco. I'm your host, Jeff Hunt. In this podcast, Alan picks up where he left off in part 1. Through a friend, he learned about Israel, took a trip there, and ended up staying for several years. But when he returned home to New York City, he fell into drinking and was homeless for a bit. After sobering up, Alan decided he needed a change of scenery, so he came to San Francisco. The rest of the episode is filled with wonderful stories of poetry readings, a student strike, getting published, and a poetry strike on the steps of City Hall. Alan ends the episode comparing the city he moved to back in 1990 to the San Francisco of today. Here's Alan.
Like my mother, I was looking for freedom.
Yeah.
She looked for freedom and found its sort of
Aversion.
but I was looking for something more.
So, let's hear about what you did.
Well, anyway, I was playing football. I went to Eastern Michigan University for one semester to play football, but Kerouac and all that just completely ruined all that stuff. I was like, I went out for football and I was like, I don't care about this.
Yeah.
I transferred back to New York. I went to City College of New York, which at that time was called the Harvard of the Proletariat.
Okay.
It was an incredible place.
Yeah.
I studied with Elie Wiesel. Anthony Burgess, wrote Clockwork Orange, he was teaching there. I mean, just incredible people.
Not bad.
And I began to really delve hard into writing.
Okay.
And I made the decision, by the way, to be a writer when I was 10. I said, I didn't even know what it was, but I just wanted to be a writer. Anyway, so by the time I got to college, I was, writing. I was failing all my courses except literature and writing. And, I won an award, a writing award in college. And somehow they just got me out of there. They just wanted to get rid of me. I graduated, And then also I met a friend named Alan Tanenbaum, who's now, he's a scientist, and his wife's a scientist. They're in New York now. So Alan was the guy who told me about Israel. My mother nobody talked about Israel. And, in 1970s, what has Israel got to do with us?
Right.
But he told me about Israel. And, I started making these, because I couldn't find any, like when I was in high school, I had a friend named Fred Johnson, who was the center on the football team, and he told me about the Black Panthers.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, wow. So like oppressed and, self-defense. But I didn't put that together with Jewish, the Holocaust, nothing like that.
Okay.
The helplessness that they had. But Alan Tanenbaum started talking about Israel. And I was enthralled. I was absolutely like, what is that? I want to know more about that. And I began to realize, I took Jewish studies courses when I was at City College and learned more about Middle East studies and Israel and all the stuff. And then in 1977, they passed a resolution in the UN equating Zionism with racism. It was a big scandal. And I was like, I'm going to Israel. I want to see I didn't know what Israel was. I thought it was like tents and camels.
Right.
I had no idea. I remember asking Alan, do they have like bookstores there, libraries?
Right.
He's like, you'll see. It's a full culture
Yeah.
Anyway, I went to Israel, and I stayed I became a citizen. I went into the army, became a citizen. I stayed for 7 years. I have an Israeli daughter
Okay.
in Israel. I did it. I went. I wanted to explore what it means not to be helpless as a Jew. Not to be facing the Holocaust. Not to be facing all that.
Right.
I wanted the sense of empowerment, and it gave me that. It gave me that, absolutely.
Awesome.
I know politically there's all this drama around Israel, but to me, as a child of a Holocaust survivor, it's such a natural and wonderful progression
Right.
from 6 million dead to having your own country.
Right.
Because we Jews learned the lesson that without your own country, without your own army, you're doomed. If you're Jewish.
Right.
And I can't explain that. You have to have that connection maybe to the Holocaust to really get that, how doomed you are.
Did that experience also have a little bit of that sort of exploration and the inspiration to explore that you got from Jack Kerouac, or was that a complete?
No, that's absolutely possible.
Yeah.
That's absolutely possible. Yeah, that's possible. It's possible to say that my openness to something. I mean, come on. I was from the Bronx, New York. What does the Middle East and Israel have to do with me?
Right.
It was throwing myself out into, like an astronaut, into outer space.
Right.
That's what it was for me.
Right.
Going to planet Venus. Of course, it turned out to be actually quite a country, quite an amazing place.
Yeah, 7 years and a child. That's and a stint in the army.
It was in a crazy. Well, I even went back in 2003 to serve again.
Wow.
So anyway, and I went there as a reporter for L.A. Times, San Francisco Chronicle, to report on the conflict, and I had a lot of involvement.
Okay.
But that was like my road. That wasn't like part of my literary work. It was just like my personal journey.
Got it.
And that was very much connected to my mother. Absolutely connected to my mother.
How did San Francisco enter your
So
sphere?
when I was when I was like 12, we were in San Francisco. We ended up as out-of-state indigents living in a flop house in the Mission.
Was that one of your Greyhound trips?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Well, my mother and my brother and I went to San Francisco, and then my father came because he was out of work. He was also probably running from something.
Yeah.
And
in the Mission, you said?
yeah, we were living in the Mission.
Do you know where exactly? I know you were young.
In Mission, back then, the Mission was not what you see now.
Sure.
Back then, the Mission was flop houses, dumpy little hotels.
Right.
A real mix of, poor people. Jack Kerouac was in the Mission for a while. It was just flop houses, winos. It was like the Bowery.
Right.
It wasn't this big Latino community. Back then, it was just a dump. We were living in a flop house run by a guy named Butterball.
Okay.
I remember my mother pulled off the covers, and there was like cockroaches.
Oh,
it was.
man.
We had no money, no food. They would give you food tickets. I mean, they ran out in like a day.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we were living there, and anyway, we finally gave up, and we went to the welfare board and said, and they said, well, we can give you Greyhound bus tickets back to New York. So we took them.
Okay.
We went back to New York.
All right.
We were crashing at someone's house. It's the whole story.
So that was your first
Yeah,
trip
but
to
that
San
was,
Francisco.
I remembered San Francisco. I think when what happened was I was hanging out in the East Village. I'll jump ahead. I was hanging out in the East Village. I began to drink myself to death. I was living at some point, I was homeless living in Tompkins Square Park.
Sure.
I was going to the New Eurekan Poets Cafe. I was one of the first people to the New Eurekan Poets Cafe.
Oh, wow.
I'm in their book, Aloud, Voices from the New Eurekan Poets Cafe.
Awesome.
I was really in the mix there, but I was homeless. I Yeah, I was hitting bottom big time. I think a lot of stuff came crashing in on me from my background, my childhood. I was in, war, all that stuff.
So this is after Israel?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I came back. I went to Columbia University. I was in graduate school.
Okay.
Published this book. I was in the mix. I was like, I was written up in the newspapers. I was getting all this stuff.
Was this like 80s?
84. I came
Got
back
it.
in 84 and 86 and 87. I was at Columbia. And but in 89, and I got married. I had my daughter. Got divorced. In 89, I started nosediving.
Okay.
I was running around in a London fog raincoat, making a lot of money, and had that book published, and all this stuff, and the drinking. I was just drinking myself to death. I just couldn't take it anymore. Couldn't take being me. Couldn't take living. Couldn't take my own story.
Right.
The whole thing just imploded, and I ended up in the streets, Tompkins Square Park. I met in Tompkins Square Park two people. One was a poet who was kind of well known, Jim Brodie. He was in the New York School of Poets.
Okay.
You knew John O'Hara and all those guys? Frank O'Hara.
I know the name.
He knew all those guys. He was Jim Brodie. He was living in the park. And one night we sat under this broken umbrella in the rain with rats running under our feet. And he said to me, you don't have to be here. You don't have to go down like this. There's a way out. I was like, what?
Yeah.
He started talking about recovery.
Okay.
And anyway, that made an impression on me. And then I had another friend who's now a very famous actor. I can't say his name.
That's all right.
He was in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
An African-American friend. And I knew that he was also going to these meetings and all this stuff. Anyway, a friend of mine from Columbia, I called him up to say, hey man, I'm broke, I wanted to hustle him for some money. And he put his wife on the phone, and she was in recovery. And she said, why don't you come to Brooklyn? We'll pay for the cab. We'll take you to him. Anyway, to make a long story short, she took me to a meeting.
Okay. You're first.
And from then on, that was it. I stayed with them for a week. And also during that drinking time, I met Margaret.
Oh, yeah.
I met Margaret. I met her at the New York Poets Cafe.
That's Margaret Casey
Margaret
that he's
Casey.
talking about, former
And
guest
we
on
kind
this
of
show. Yeah.
we'd had a thing.
Yeah.
And yeah. And then after a week of sobriety, I said, I got to go. I can't impose on you nice people anymore. I asked Danny to lend me $100, which he did. And I bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco, Greyhound.
Can you explain why at that time you chose? What
I think,
what was it?
well, first of all, I knew in the New York Poets Cafe a lot of poets who were from San Francisco who had come, and they had told me about a scene out there. But of course, that was just simply, the catalyst. The real underlying reason, I think, was that we left San Francisco in such a state of disgrace when I was 12. It was a shattering experience.
Mm-hmm.
To be kicked out of California.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta work
Right.
hard to get kicked out
Yes,
of
we're
California.
very forgiving here.
We were kicked out of California.
So you had to kind of make that right.
I had to make that right.
Got
I'm
it.
pretty sure that was what it was.
Yeah.
And,
But then also there was a literary connection, like you said.
there was
there
a
were some
literary and
scenes
Kerouac.
and yeah.
the whole beat thing, and
Yeah.
there was a literary connection.
Okay, so so you came out here, Greyhound.
Came out on a Greyhound. Margaret and I moved in together.
Okay.
That's a whole story.
That's
you
her
should ask
time.
her about that story.
That might be in her podcast, actually.
And I got into recovery, and I stayed. I've been now
You
clean
said
and sober for 30 years.
30 years.
Still.
Was
Still.
it 1990 that you moved here then, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations,
1990.
by the way.
Oh,
That's
thank you.
fucking awesome.
So, and my whole life changed.
Yeah.
My whole life changed because of California, recovery, San Francisco, which was such a different place back then.
Sure.
A city of poets, a city of writers and artists. It was an incredible place.
Mhm.
It was just an amazing place. Margaret and I didn't have a dime to our names. She was living with somebody and she moved out on him and moved in with me. What happened was we went to this apartment rental place, and they had this book you could look in, and we saw this address of her boarding house in the Lower Haight. Mm-hmm. We went and knocked on the door and said, hi, we're looking for a room. The guy closed the door in our face. We didn't look savory. We looked unsavory.
Right.
Knocked on the next door, which was right next door, and said, hey, do you have, it was another boarding house on Page Street. And we said, do you have a room here? And the guy said, yeah, we got a room. And we said, Mark, his name was. I said, look, man, we got no money. He said, okay, we'll give you the room, and when you got the money, let me pay up. That's how it was.
Wow.
It was incredible. And it was a fun experience. Yeah. It was fun. It was great. A lot of poets. We started going to readings, Paradise Lounge, Cafe Babar. There was a group of poets called the Barbarians that I was part of. And the Barbarians, David Lerner, Bruce Isaacson, Julia Vinograd, Vampire Mike Cassell, Danny Higgs, just a different, Mel Thompson.
I know Dan Higgs from
Higgs.
From his band. I don't know him personally, but from his band.
Danny and I like this.
Lungfish?
Lungfish, right.
Yeah.
But Danny was a great poet.
Absolutely.
In fact,
I saw him do poetry.
I edited his first book of poetry.
There you go.
And every Thursday night, it was a sheet metal lined room. And there was a clothesline strung across the front. There was like little grandstand seating. And Julia Vinograd would get up and bang the sheet metal and shout, starting. And then there was a list. And you got up and read. And you could read up to 5 minutes or 3 poems.
Okay.
But if they didn't like your work, you got hissed, booed, jeering, laughing, mocking you. Mm-hmm. People would just mock you. Just get the hell out of here. That sucked. You suck. I mean, like that.
Yeah.
So to get up there took a lot. Anyway, one time I was reading there, and there was somebody taking photographs, and it was a guy from the San Francisco, Carrie Tennis, from the San Francisco Weekly. And he wrote this cover story with me, big picture of me, and as the kind of focus of the thing. And
nice.
That was kind of like my first step off, like really stepping into that world. Anyway, that went on, the whole thing, and I got sent to Germany. They brought me to Germany to do poetry, and kind of took off. And in that way.
And when and how did you meet Ron Turner or get involved with Last Gasp?
Ron Turner. Well, I first met Ron Turner back in, I don't know, must have been like 2012 or 11. Okay. But I had heard about Last Gasp and Ron Turner, and I just never had any reason to intersect with what he was doing.
Right. A different literary.
There was no.
Different publishing world.
Yeah, I mean, I started getting published by Little Brown and Farrar Straus, and writing novels and memoirs and all this stuff. There was no. It was just going in a different trajectory altogether. But we did meet. We did meet a couple of times. I didn't know what to make of him. He was always this old guy surrounded by these beautiful young girls.
Nothing's really changed there.
You know what I mean? It's like, what's...
That's why I feel bad when I'm around him. I'm like, I'm bringing your game down.
What's this guy, what's his story? It's like, he looks like 70, and he's got these beautiful ladies around him.
Yeah.
They adored him.
Yeah?
Adore him. What I think the first thing that was R. Crumb.
Yeah.
Because I was in touch with R. Crumb. We were corresponding, and that's when I began to see another aspect of Ron, and about Last Gasp. And the other thing was I was doing these outlaw Bibles, poetry, essays, and literature. The Outlaw Bible American Literature was reviewed on the cover of the New York Times Book Review. Wow. And that was the first time anything from alternative culture ever got reviewed on the cover.
Wow.
In a 3-page review.
Amazing.
It kind of broke through. And I was really exploring hard this dimension of outlaw writers.
Okay.
It was just a matter of time before, outlaw artists.
Right.
And, R. Crumb and others. And also, when I was living in San Francisco, I met a group of young artists. I was teaching at the Academy of Art.
Oh.
A couple of them went there.
Mm-hmm.
They were living, a lot of them, in the Tenderloin.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, Christopher Birch, D. Young 5, Brett Amory. They had this whole subculture in the Tenderloin of galleries in basements of apartment buildings that they were managing. One guy had a print. It was like a factory. They were printing T-shirts and lithographic stuff, all illegal.
Right.
Like none of it was approved by any legal. So
Right.
the whole it was like another world underneath the Tenderloin
Mm-hmm.
that I kind of fell into, and I began to write articles about some of their art. And a lot of these guys were way better than the mainstream artists that I knew.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, wow, this guy is fantastic. Brett Amory, fantastic painter.
Writing articles for whom or for what? For what publication?
So let me see. I wrote, I feel like they were like web magazine, online magazine, and also a High Fructose.
Okay.
Like I wrote on Christopher Birch for High Fructose. Do you know High Fructose?
I've heard of it. I never.
High Fructose.
Never,
It's a glossy
Yeah.
magazine, and then there were like these websites, magazines, web magazines, art magazines. So I fell in with these young artists, and they were terrific. They were absolutely terrific. And
What years are we talking now?
This would have been 2006, 2007.
Okay.
2008.
Mid first decade.
Yeah, I was teaching at the Academy of Art in 2004.
Okay.
And in 2004, I led a strike. You can look that up. I led a strike against the Academy of Art.
Okay.
You can look it up in the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle.
A faculty strike or?
It was students.
Oh, okay.
I was on the faculty, and what happened was they threw out you can do what you want with this. They threw out a student for they threw him. It wasn't just threw him out. He was disgraced. They got rid of him. They sent him back to Oregon, like this 18-year-old kid crying in a limo to the airport, gone. Then one of my students. And they asked me what I thought about it, and I said, that's terrible. They called me and said, what do you think of that? I said, that's absolutely terrible, because they knew I wrote for the Chronicle, and I wrote for the Los Angeles Times. And I actually said to them, I'm going to write something about it. And I got my friend James Sullivan, who was the pop culture critic. He wrote this big article, about me talking about them. Then I tried to organize teachers to strike because they were throwing other students out for no reason. Just crazy. So I led a strike, and I tried to get the teachers to but they were terrified. They were absolutely terrified. They were like, no, we'll lose our job. And I said, so lose your job, so what?
Yeah.
You can get another job. They were like, no. But the students, they we've had it.
Yeah.
And so there was a huge strike. I led a huge strike. You can read about it in the Chronicle. It was incredible. They shut down all of New Montgomery Street. Yes. They shut down the Powell Street branch. It was all shut down.
Nice.
And the students came out and struck. I was teaching, several classes, and I said to my students, look, I don't want any of you to get in trouble. If you don't want to walk out with me, don't walk out. They all walked out.
Nice.
And they even would come up to me years after and say, that was the best experience we ever had in college. Thank you. It's like.
I love it.
Anyway.
I do want to get your thoughts. I think, first of all, you don't live in San Francisco currently. And you don't have to talk about why if you don't want to, obviously. But I kind of want to get your opinion and your impression of what the city has become and what it is now.
Okay. Look, I mean, when I got to San Francisco, it was an open place for artists, writers. It was a fantastic, rich, vibrant city. Politically vibrant, culturally, I mean, it was a world capital. I mean, people came from, when I got to San Francisco, poets and writers and artists came from around the world just to be in San Francisco. Plus, it had the whole beat heritage, that was fantastic. And all of that is completely gone. I've seen a great city die. I consider it a dead town. It's gone.
Is that why you left?
In part.
Is it part
In
of it?
part. In part. There was no reason to hang on there anymore. Even New York, which my hometown is, changed irreparably, but it's not to that degree. San Francisco became a bedroom community of Silicon Valley.
Mm.
It became, a suburb of Mountain View. And the city, San Francisco, is a great city. It's a little city with a world-class reputation. I mean, I've done I have books translated into other languages, German, Dutch, published in England. If you go to other countries and see the reverence for San Francisco that was felt there, it's so touching. I mean, the writers, you're from San Francisco, now it's gone. It's gone. Nobody reveres San Francisco anymore.
Right.
The writers don't care about San Francisco anymore. To be a writer was to be, some kind of cultural aristocrat. I mean, you could be a poor poet in the Tenderloin, publishing in little magazines, and you were like a god. Now it's all gone, all completely gone.
Do you have any hope of any sort of revival or?
It's interesting that you asked me that, because I was just talking about that not too long ago with a friend, saying, you know what, that this pandemic, which is horrible, may save San Francisco, because finally all the richies can move out, go home, or go where you're going, and maybe the rents are plummeting. Maybe they'll plummet to a point where people who are real artists can move back and revive the city. Valencia Street, which is now, became a disgrace. I mean, Rolls Royces and Jaguars rolling up Valencia Street. When I got to San Francisco, Valencia Street was called the Street of the Poets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was like one club. If I can remember, my memory is not good anymore. But there was a club where the transsexual community put on these unbelievable shows, where poets and writers and artists would come and build sets. People who weren't even in the trans community will come and build sets, and that was like the wildest, funnest show. And great poetry and just amazing theater, things like that. Mm-hmm. I think it was called, what was it called? Club, I can't remember. But it was wild.
Yeah.
And you felt like anything was possible. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't even this harsh division between, say, the transsexual community and the heterosexual community. There wasn't.
Right.
It was all mushed together, one big kind of crazy carnival of poetry and art. The south of Market, I mean, all these abandoned warehouses were turned into like flying circuses and just wild, amazing poetry readings. It was the whole city.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something. I led a strike, and I was big then on leading strikes.
Okay.
I led the poets' strike of San Francisco.
Okay.
I don't know if you're aware there was a poets' strike at San Francisco.
No. When was this?
1993 or 4.
Okay.
Something like that. Okay. What happened was there was a cafe called the Blue Parrot. A woman named Kathy Georges, who's now in New York. She runs a reading in New York. The police... Oh, what happened was somebody at City Hall got this crazy idea that they could make money from the explosion of poetry readings. There were poetry readings happening. You know, we were written up in the Chronicle. There's a picture of me and Andy Clausen in the Chronicle reading. I mean, it gave the impression that there were thousands of people. There were hundreds, but not thousands. But anyway, somebody at City Hall was like, oh, maybe we can make money from this poetry thing. They sent cops to the Blue Monkey Cafe to shut down the reading. They came in literally and pulled the plug, and they said this reading is an illegal reading, shut down. You have to go to City Hall and pay a $200 poetry permit.
Okay. They're just making shit up now.
Somebody called me up and said, Alan, have you heard about this? What should we do? I said, we have to have a strike. Let's have a strike. Where should we have to strike? I said, on the steps of City Hall. We went 10 poets. Me, Jack Hirschman. You know Jack Hirschman?
Yeah, sure.
Me, Jack Hirschman, a bunch of poets. 10 of us went to this step. And you could see that also in the newspapers. It's in all the newspapers. So we went and we had a strike. And there were police there with riot gear.
Yes.
And there was us. You know.
I love that image of riot gear versus
poets. We didn't even have a microphone. What happened was Frank Jordan was the mayor.
Right.
Jordan was embarrassed to death because also, besides poets and cops, there were reporters. Because I made sure to call up Associated Press, Chronicle, you name it. There was a whole bevy of reporters there. I don't know if that's the right term, bevy of reporters. But anyway, They were there and taking pictures and all this. And what happened was Frank Jordan called me and Hirschman upstairs to meet.
In the mayor's office.
In the mayor's office.
Got it.
And he said, what can we do to stop this? I said, you have to remove that law from the books. And until you do, we are going to strike in every single cafe, every single bar, every single venue in San Francisco until it's over.
It actually was a law? I thought maybe they were making shit up.
No, they fished it out. They found it on the books.
A poetry permit?
Probably from the Lenny Bruce days.
Oh.
You know? Anyway, so what happened was he was like... And then what happened was Angela Aliotta was running against him for mayor. So she aligned herself with me. She's like, we're going with Alan. And then the Chronicle ran stories about me and Angela Aliotta and how she's supporting the poets. And she said, my father, you know, Joe Aliotta, who was the former mayor, he wants to meet you. And I met with him, and he said, we want to have a big reading on the steps of City Hall.
Yes.
We'll bring out all the media and television, and we want to crush this. Of course, he was just boosting his daughters.
Right.
Anyway, we had a reading on the steps of City Hall again, and Joe Aliotta read a poem of his.
Yes.
And Angela introduced me in the reading, and this whole thing. It was huge. It was like a huge audience outside of City Hall, and we had microphones and all this, and the media were all there. It was on CNN.
Oh my God.
It was in Time magazine.
It is, I mean,
you can still look it up. It's probably still in Time magazine.
It's newsworthy. I'll say that.
Oh, it was Time magazine. Yeah. I mean, they called me up and interviewed me, and anyway, to make a long story short, we Francis Ford Coppola, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and me at City Hall, sitting the three of us together, and they shot down the law. Nice. We were in the audience, you know, waiting to see this happen, and they did it, of course. I mean, the whole city rose up to defend the poets.
And that's what San Francisco used.
That's San Francisco. That's the San Francisco that I knew and loved. That San Francisco is, right now, belly up, gone.
That was Alan Kaufman. On the next episode of Storied San Francisco, we'll get to know teacher and native San Franciscan Ida McCrae. This is a very special podcast for us, so please join us for episode 40 next Tuesday. And don't forget to vote. Music for Storied San Francisco is by Otis McDonald. Photography is by Michelle Kilfeather. The show is hosted and produced by me. Michelle and I have produced more than 130 episodes over the last 3 years, and you can find them all at our website, storiedsf.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can like, comment, and share the stuff we put out. Find the podcast just about everywhere you can listen, including, most recently, BFF.FM's new podcast network. Please subscribe to stay up to date on all the content we publish. We love feedback, so if you have any, our email is storiedsf@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Stay strong, stay safe, and stay healthy.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.FM podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.FM, best frequencies forever.